All right, so let's jump into a flooring question I know a lot of people out there are dealing with. Can you lay LVT right over your existing tile?
Oh, yeah. It's a question I get all the time.
If so, like what are the tips and tricks and what do we have to know to get it to look amazing and last a long time?
The answer is like a lot of things in home renovation. It depends.
Okay, so not a simple yes or no.
Right.
I am intrigued. What are some of the factors we need to unpack here to help our listeners decide what to do?
Well, first off, LVT is a fantastic option in general.
Yeah.
It's durable, it's water resistant, comes in a huge range of styles.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to laying it over existing tile, the success hinges on the condition of that tile and how much prep work you're willing to do.
Makes sense you wouldn't build a house on a shaky foundation.
Right.
So walk us through some of the red flags that would maybe make this a bad idea.
One of the biggest concerns is moisture.
Okay.
If your existing tile is prone to dampness, or if you're in a humid climate, you could get trapped moisture between the layers, which could lead to mold and mildew.
Yeah, not exactly the spa-like bathroom you were hoping for.
Right.
So in those cases, would you always recommend ripping out the old tile before laying new LVT?
Not necessarily. There are ways to mitigate the moisture risks.
Okay.
Like installing a proper moisture barrier. We can talk about that later.
So good to know there are options.
Yes.
Now, another thing I've heard is that uneven tiles can cause problems. Is that a thing?
Absolutely. Uneven tiles can telegraph through the LVT,
Okay.
creating an uneven surface that not only looks bad, but can wear down faster in certain spots.
So it's like driving a car on a bumpy road.
Mm-hmm.
Your tires are going to wear out quicker in the areas that take more impact.
Exactly.
So how do we make sure that the surface is smooth enough for a good LVT installation?
That's where the prep work comes in.
Okay.
If you're dealing with minor imperfections, a self-leveling compound can do wonders.
Okay.
But if the tiles are significantly uneven or there are deep grout lines, you might need to remove them or use a thicker underlayment.
To compensate.
Right.
Got it. So no cutting corners on the prep work. Speaking of underlayment, what are some things people should keep in mind when choosing an underlayment for this type of installation?
The type of LVT you choose plays a big role here.
Okay.
If you're going with a click lock system,
Right.
you'll need a specific type of underlayment that's compatible.
Okay.
Adhesive-backed LVT, on the other hand, might not need an underlayment at all. It really depends on the manufacturer's recommendations.
So make sure everything plays together nicely.
Yeah.
Are there any other factors that might influence the choice of underlayment?
Definitely think about the level of sound insulation you want.
Right.
Some underlayments are specifically designed to reduce noise transmission,
Well, that's a good point. I hadn't even considered that.
which can be a major plus if you live in an apartment or have noisy downstairs neighbors.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about moisture, uneven surfaces, and underlayment. What else should we be thinking about before we get into this project?
Well, one thing that often gets overlooked is assessing the existing tile itself. Are there any cracks or loose tiles that need to be addressed before you lay down the LVT?
So it's like making sure the canvas is smooth before you start painting a masterpiece.
Exactly.
Right. It's all about setting yourself up for success. So walk us through what a thorough tile inspection would entail. What are we looking for?
You want to start by checking for any loose tiles.
Okay.
Tap on each one with a hard object like a screwdriver handle. If you hear a hollow sound, that tile might need to be resecured or replaced.
So it's like playing a percussion instrument with your floor. I like that. What about cracks? How do those affect the LVT installation?
Cracks can be tricky.
Okay.
Minor hairline cracks might not be a big deal.
Right.
But larger cracks can cause the LVT to flex and eventually break down.
So a small crack is a cosmetic issue. A big crack could be a structural warning sign.
Exactly. And don't forget to inspect the grout lines as well. Are they crumbling? Are they deeply recessed? All of these factors impact the smoothness of your final LVT installation.
It sounds like we really need to be meticulous detectives when it comes to assessing the existing tile. But what happens if we do find some problem areas? Is it a DIY fix, or do we need to call on the professionals?
It really depends on your comfort level and the extent of the damage.
Okay.
Minor repairs like regrouting or replacing a few tiles are definitely doable for a handy homeowner.
Yeah.
But if you're dealing with widespread damage or structural issues, it's best to call in a pro.
Okay, so know your limits and don't be afraid to ask for help when needed solid advice. Now, let's assume we've gotten the all clear on our tile inspection and we're ready to move on to the actual LVT installation.
Yeah.
What are some common pitfalls that DIers should be aware of?
One mistake I see a lot is people rushing the prep work.
Okay.
They think, oh, it's just going over existing tile. How hard can it be?
Right.
But remember, the quality of your prep work directly impacts the final result.
So taking your time and being meticulous is key.
Right.
What are some specific steps that people tend to rush or skip altogether?
Cleaning is a big one. You need to make sure that the existing tile is absolutely spotless. No dust, no grime, no residue from old cleaners.
Right.
Any debris left behind can prevent the LVT from adhering properly, especially if you're using an adhesive system.
So a good degreaser and a thorough vacuuming are our best friends at this stage. What else tends to get overlooked?
Acclimating the LVT is crucial, especially if you're working with a quick lock system.
Okay.
You need to let the planks adjust to the temperature and humidity of the room for at least 24 hours before installation.
So it's like letting the LVT get acquainted with its new home before you start putting it all together. Why is that so important?
LVT is made from a type of vinyl that expands and contracts with temperature changes.
Okay.
If you install it straight out of the box, it might buckle or gap as it acclimates.
Right, which wouldn't be ideal.
Right.
Makes perfect sense. Now, once we've prepped the surface, acclimated the LVT, and we're finally ready to start laying it down, what are some tips for making sure it looks professional and not like a DIY disaster?
Starting in the right place is key. You want to begin in the center of the room and work outward.
Okay.
This helps create a balanced and symmetrical look, especially if you're using a pattern.
So kind of like starting with the keystone of an arch and building out from there.
Yeah.
What else is important for a visually appealing installation?
Pay attention to the direction of the planks.
Okay.
If you're mimicking hardwood flooring, for example, you want the planks to run parallel to the longest wall in the room.
Right.
This creates a more natural flow and makes a space feel larger.
Ah, those are the little details that make a big difference. Now, I'm sure there's some tricky areas that come up during installation, like corners and edges. How do we tackle those?
That's where a good utility knife in some patients come in handy.
Right.
You'll need to measure carefully and make precise cuts to ensure a snug fit around obstacles and along the walls.
And don't forget those expansion gaps we talked about earlier. You want to leave a small space between the LVT and the wall to allow for expansion and contraction.
Absolutely. It's a small detail that can prevent big headaches down the road.
Speaking of headaches, let's shift gears for a moment and talk about a topic that often causes those choosing the right LVT style. There are so many options out there. How do we help our listeners narrow down the choices?
It can definitely feel overwhelming. My first piece of advice is to consider the overall style of your home.
Good.
Are you going for a modern minimalist look, a rustic farmhouse vibe, a classic traditional feel?
So the LVT should complement the existing decor, not clash with it.
Exactly, and don't be afraid to experiment with different colors and textures. LVT comes in a wide range of options.
Right.
From realistic wood grains to sleek concrete looks to vibrant patterns.
It's like having an artist palette of flooring options.
Yeah.
But how do we know if a particular style will actually work in our space? It's hard to visualize from a tiny sample.
That's a great point. Ordering samples is a must.
Okay.
Most flooring retailers offer them, and it's the best way to see how the LVT looks in your actual room with your lighting and existing decor.
So samples are essential for making an informed decision now, once we've chosen our perfect LVT and successfully installed it. How do we keep it looking its best for years to come?
Maintenance is key, but the good news is LVT is relatively easy to care for.
Okay.
Regular sweeping or vacuuming will remove dust and dirt, and a damp mop with a pH-neutral cleaner is all you need for deeper cleaning.
So no need for harsh chemicals or fancy treatments. That's a relief.
Exactly. And one simple tip to prevent scratches and dents is to use furniture pads under heavy objects.
Okay.
It's a small step that can make a big difference in preserving the beauty of your LVT floor.
Great advice. I think we've covered a lot of ground today, from assessing the existing tile to choosing the right LVT style to mastering those tricky installation techniques. But before we wrap up part one of our deep dive, I want to touch on a topic that's often a deciding factor for homeowners. Cost. How does laying LVT over tile compare cost-wise to other flooring options?
Well, LVT in general is known for being a budget-friendly option, especially compared to hardwood or natural stone. And when you factor in the savings from skipping the tile removal process, it becomes even more appealing.
So you're saving on both materials and labor. That's a win-win, But I'm guessing the actual cost can vary quite a bit depending on the type of LVT we choose, right?
Absolutely, you get what you pay for with LVT.
Yeah.
A higher quality product with a thicker wear layer will obviously cost more upfront, but it will also last longer and look better over time.
So it's an investment worth considering now for our environmentally conscious listeners out there. Is LVT a sustainable flooring option?
It's a question that's becoming increasingly important. And the
Yeah.
good news is that the flooring industry is making strides in sustainability.
Good.
Many LVT manufacturers are now using recycled materials in their products, and some are even achieving third-party certifications for environmental responsibility.
It's great to hear. Are there any specific certifications that our listeners should look for when shopping for eco-friendly LVT?
One of the most reputable certifications is FloorScore. It ensures that the LVT meets strict standards for indoor air quality, meaning it doesn't emit harmful VOCs.
So floor score is a good indicator of a product that's safe for both our health and the environment. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the nitty-gritty of tile inspection to the big picture of sustainability. But I have a feeling our listeners still have some burning questions about laying LVT over tile. So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll tackle those head-on and leave you feeling like LVT experts yourselves. Okay, welcome back. So we left off talking about assessing the tile, so let's get back into that.
Okay, so we were talking about checking for loose tiles.
Right.
And we were tapping them with something like a screwdriver handle to see if we get a hollow sound.
Right, to see if it needs to be resecured or replaced.
Exactly.
What about cracks?
Oh, cracks,
How do they affect the LVT?
they can be a little bit tricky, minor hairline cracks.
Okay.
Might not be that big of a deal.
Okay.
But larger cracks can cause the LVT to flex and then eventually break down.
So small crack, cosmetic issue, big crack, maybe a structural warning sign.
Yeah, and don't forget the grout lines, too.
Oh, right, the grout lines, yeah.
Were they crumbling? Are they deeply recessed?
Right.
All of these things can impact how smooth your final product is going to be.
Yes, it sounds like we need to be like super meticulous detectives when we're assessing our existing tile. What if we find some problem areas? Is it a DIY fix, or do we call in the pros?
I mean, it really depends on your comfort level and how bad the damage is.
Okay.
Minor repairs like regrouting or replacing a couple tiles,
Right.
that's definitely doable for a handy homeowner.
Here.
But if you're dealing with widespread damage or structural issues,
Know your limits and don't be afraid to ask for help.
right.
Okay, that's good advice. So now let's just assume we've gotten the all clear on our tile inspection. We're ready to actually install the LVT. What are some common pitfalls that DIRs should watch out for?
One mistake I see all the time is people just rushing the prep work. They think, oh, it's just going over the existing tile. How hard can it be?
Right.
But the quality of your prep work really has a huge impact on the final result.
Yeah, so taking your time and being meticulous is key.
For sure.
What are some specific steps that people tend to rush or skip altogether?
Cleaning is a big one.
Okay.
You want to make sure that tile is absolutely spotless.
Oh,
No dust grime residue from old cleaners.
right.
Anything left behind could prevent the LVT from sticking properly, especially if you're using an adhesive.
So like a good degreaser and a thorough vacuum are our best friends in this situation.
Absolutely.
What else tends to get overlooked?
Acclimating the LVT,
Okay.
especially with a click lock system.
Right.
You need to let those planks adjust to the temperature and the humidity in the room for at least 24 hours before you even start.
So it's like letting the LVT get acquainted with its new home before we start putting it all together. Why is that so important?
So LVT is made from a type of vinyl that expands and contracts
Really?
with temperature changes. So if you install it right out of the box,
Okay.
it could buckle or gap as it acclimates to the room.
Right. And we don't want that.
No.
Okay. So that makes perfect sense. Now, once we've prepped the surface, we've acclimated the LVT,
Yeah.
we're finally ready to start laying it down.
Mm.
What are some tips to make sure it looks professional and not like a total DIY disaster?
Starting in the right place is key.
Okay.
You want to start in the center of the room and work your way out.
Okay.
That'll help create a balanced, symmetrical look, especially if you're using a pattern.
So kind of like starting with the keystone of an arch and building out from there.
Exactly.
What else is important to get a nice visually appealing installation?
Pay attention to the direction of the planks.
Okay.
So if you're mimicking hardwood flooring, for example, you want the planks to run parallel to the longest wall in the room.
Right.
This is going to make the space look bigger and just create a more natural flow.
Those are those little details that make a big difference. Now, I'm sure there are some tricky areas that come up during installation, like corners and edges. What do we do about that?
That's where a good utility knife and a little bit of patience comes in handy.
Yeah.
You're going to need to measure carefully and make precise cuts
Right.
to ensure a snug fit around obstacles and along the walls.
And don't forget those expansion gaps that we talked about earlier. We want to leave a little bit of space around the edges.
Absolutely.
For it to expand and contract.
Yeah, it's a small detail that can prevent a big headache down the road.
Speaking of headaches, let's shift gears for a sec and talk about a topic that often causes those choosing the right LVT style.
Yeah.
There are so many options out there. How do we help our listeners narrow down the choices?
I know it can be overwhelming.
It is.
My first piece of advice would be just consider the overall style of your home.
Okay.
Are you going for modern, minimalist, rustic, farmhouse, classic, traditional?
So the LVT should complement the existing decor and not clash with it.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to experiment with different colors and textures.
Yeah.
You know, LVT comes in a wide range of options.
It does.
From realistic wood grains to sleek concrete looks to, more vibrant patterns.
It's like having an artist's palette of flooring options.
Yeah.
But how do we know if a particular style is going to actually work in our space?
Yeah.
It's hard to visualize from a tiny little sample.
That's a great point. I always recommend order samples.
Right.
Most flooring retailers offer them.
Yeah.
And it's really the best way to see how the LVT looks in your actual room with your lighting and decor.
Okay, so samples are essential
Yeah.
for making an informed decision. Now, once we've chosen our perfect LVT, we've installed it successfully.
Yeah.
How do we keep it looking great for years to come?
Maintenance is key. But the good news is LVT is relatively easy to care for.
Good.
Just regular sweeping or vacuuming will get rid of dust and dirt.
Okay.
And a damp mop with a pH neutral cleaner is all you need for a deeper clean.
So no need for harsh chemicals or any fancy treatments?
Nope.
Okay, that's a relief.
Yeah, and a simple tip to prevent scratches and dents is to use furniture pads under heavy objects.
Makes sense.
It's a small step that can really go a long way in protecting your floor.
Awesome advice.
Yeah.
So I think we've covered a lot of ground today, from assessing the existing tile to choosing the right LVT style to mastering those tricky installation techniques. But before we wrap up part 2 of our deep dive, I want to touch on a topic that's often a deciding factor for homeowners: cost. How does laying LVT over tile compare cost-wise to other flooring options?
Well, LVT in general is known for being pretty budget-friendly,
Yeah.
especially compared to hardwood or natural stone.
Right.
And when you add in the savings from skipping the tile removal,
Right.
it gets even more appealing.
So we're saving on materials and labor.
Right.
That's awesome. That's a win-win. But I'm assuming the actual cost can vary a lot depending on the LVT we choose, right?
Absolutely. You get what you pay for with LVT.
Okay.
A higher quality product with a thicker wear layer will cost more upfront, but it will also last longer and look better over time.
So it's an investment.
Right.
Worth considering now for our environmentally conscious listeners out there: is LVT a sustainable option?
It's a question that's coming up more and more.
It is, yeah.
And the flooring industry is making strides in sustainability.
Good.
A lot of manufacturers are using recycled materials, and some are even getting third-party certifications for environmental responsibility.
That's great to hear. Are there any specific certifications that our listeners should look for when shopping for eco-friendly LVT?
One of the most reputable certifications is Floor Score.
Okay.
It means that the LVT meets strict standards for indoor air quality.
Right.
So it's not going to emit those harmful VOCs.
So Floor Score is a good indicator of a product that's safe for us and the planet.
Exactly.
Awesome. We've covered a lot today, from the very detailed tile inspection to the big picture of sustainability. But I have a feeling our listeners might still have some questions about laying LVT over tile. So stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive. We're going to tackle those head on and hopefully leave you feeling like LVT experts. Okay, welcome back to the final part of our LVT deep dive. So I'm ready to tackle those lingering questions and help you confidently decide if this is the right project for you.
All right, let's do it.
One thing I'm wondering about is longevity. I mean, we've talked about the importance of prep work and choosing quality materials. But will LVT laid over tile really last as long as if it was installed on, a subfloor?
Yeah, that's a great question. Basically, if you've addressed all those potential issues like moisture and unevenness, and you've chosen a good durable LV2 product, there's really no reason why it shouldn't last just as long. We're talking, decades of stylish, functional flooring.
That's reassuring. So it's not really a compromise in terms of lifespan, just a different approach.
Right.
Speaking of different approaches, I know some listeners might be thinking, why not just rip out the old tile and start fresh? Is there ever a time when that's the better option?
Oh, yeah, for sure. There are definitely some situations where removal is the way to go. Like, for instance, if you're dealing with extensive tile damage,
Okay,
or if you suspect there might be asbestos in the existing flooring,
right.
it's best to just err on the side of caution and have it professionally removed.
Okay, so safety first.
Right.
And, if the damage is too extensive, that's when we call in the pros. Okay, let's talk about budget. We mentioned that this can be a cost-effective approach, but how does it really compare to other flooring options?
Well, just think about it this way. You're basically eliminating all those demo and disposal costs
Right.
associated with tile removal, plus you're saving on labor.
Right, because it's faster.
Yeah, exactly.
So win for our wallets and our schedules.
Right.
But I'm guessing the actual cost can vary quite a bit depending on the type of LVT that we choose.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. The price of LVT can range widely, based on the thickness of the wear layer, the quality of the design, even just the brand name.
So do your research,
Yeah.
shop around.
Absolutely.
Are there any other kind of hidden costs that we should be aware of?
Don't forget about the underlayment if you need it.
Right.
And if you're not comfortable doing the installation yourself, you'll have to factor in labor costs.
Yeah, get a good estimate from a pro.
Right.
That
Okay.
covers all the bases.
Right.
Okay, now for our listeners who are, really passionate about sustainability, are there any eco-friendly options when it comes to LVT these days?
Yeah, there are a lot of manufacturers that are really stepping up their game in terms of sustainability. So look for LVT products that are made with recycled content or that have those third-party certifications like Floor Score.
Right, so we can have beautiful floors and be good to the planet.
Exactly.
Perfect. So as we wrap up our deep dive, what final words of wisdom do you have for our listeners who are now armed with all this LVT knowledge?
I'd say the most important thing is to assess your own situation carefully.
Okay.
Consider the condition of your tile, your budget, your style preferences, your
Yeah.
DIY skills.
Right.
If you approach it with a good plan, laying LVT over tile can be a fantastic way to update your space.
Absolutely, without, breaking the bank.
Exactly.
So do your homework, weigh the pros and cons, and make the best decision for your home. If you want, explore different LVT options and get more inspiration, where should we send our listeners?
Flooring365.co.uk is a great resource. They have a huge selection of LVT, plus tons of information and expert advice.
Perfect. And for those of you who have been with us on this deep dive, we'd love to hear from you. Are you feeling more confident about this project? What were your biggest takeaways? Share your comments and questions, and we'll be sure to respond. Until next time, happy flooring.